President Donald Trump recently hosted the new mayor of New York City, Zoran Mamdani, at the White House for a surprisingly friendly meeting. We're going to talk about this meeting and we're going to talk about a larger topic because this meeting highlights, I believe, one of Trump's major vulnerabilities and also America's largest vulnerability, which is, in my opinion, tolerance for cultures that do not reciprocate that tolerance for the United States or that tolerance for the West. So stick around. We're going to be discussing this issue. So it's a little hard to tell how real the friendliness was of this meeting. They were extremely friendly, which is kind of funny to see. Mamdani has previously called Trump a fascist. After this meeting was over, actually, a reporter was like, "Do you still think Trump is a fascist?" And Mamdani was like, "Yeah, I still think he's a fascist, but we had a really good meeting." And so it was like very odd, friendly meeting. Trump, of course, has called Mamdani a communist. But to be fair, Mamdani is a communist. I mean, he is a self-declared socialist. People are calling him a democratic socialist. He hasn't not called himself a democratic socialist. He's called himself a socialist. And I don't have time to get into it, but there's no difference between a socialist and a communist. The end result is exactly the same, or some define socialism as a step towards communism, but the end result is the same. The policies are the same. There's no difference. So it's not really slander calling him a communist because he is one. It talks about, seizing the means of production, all those kinds of things. So this was a smart political move, but it also could have been possibly self-interested. I've heard the phrase, keep your enemies closer than your friends or whatever. I also saw somebody pointed out, of course, that Trump owns a lot of property in New York City. And so maybe this was a little bit of a self-interested, maybe possibly like, okay, got to buddy up with this guy a little bit, make sure he doesn't try to keep him real close, make sure he doesn't run New York City into the ground and my property loses all its value. I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing. Ryan, you can let me know what you think about the meeting actually before I continue.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see the entire thing, but I think that Trump knows what he's doing. I mean, he knows how to come out, swing in and punch in and get in the public image in one way and then make the deal happen or whatever it is. And I've even heard people speculating that perhaps he wants to cozy up with him so that his city council will be against him and maybe he'll be ineffective then at getting collaboration with him among the city council members, because they think, well, if he's going to go again with this fascist Trump and be on his team, then we're not going to work with him. So it's just kind of like, maybe it's, getting some of that going. But to me, it's just kind of like, it's playing the fiddle. It's kind of like, okay, song and dance, whatever. Let's see what actually happens and if they actually move the needle on anything. And so I think if Mamdani is willing to have a conversation, I think it's on Trump to do that. I mean, I think that is the biggest cities in America. I think it's good to have lines open. Trump's somebody who's not afraid to throw a punch when he needs to, and to really put people's feet to the fire and to get them to take the action that he wants them to take, and that is in the best interest of the nation. And so I think it's good for him to be close, because then he'll be able to get the influence in there as much as possible. It's just like, well, I think he should be having a conversation with Xi from China and from Russia, and from he should be with leaders everywhere that are willing to have conversations with him. So I think it's good. The issue I would have is if it was, there started being some caving and some turning and all that, but I don't see that. I don't see that happening in the near future at any point in time.
No, I get it. All good points. I do think of this as kind of like politics as usual. People talk big game about each other, and then they meet each other and have like a friendly conversation and make pictures for the press or whatever. So we'll see how this relationship goes in the future. I do, however, want to point out, turning the conversation towards our main topic here. I was a little this is a little bit of a concerning meaning for me, and it highlights why I think, as I outlined, that I think that there is a vulnerability of America and even in Trump, and that is basically just regular liberalism, which is really common and even like part of the core of the United States. So Trump, in my opinion, is like a 90s liberal. I know he's been a big conservative figure, but he's really at heart, he's basically a 90s liberal. So he kind of has the attitude of, let's get along with everybody. We're all going to make money together. We'll run the business, we'll run the government together. He gets along with pretty much everybody, which there's something that's good and to be said about that. However, the whole idea behind liberalism is the idea that everybody is like inherently the same, and it's the individuals themselves and their individual freedom is more important than like the larger group, social cohesion, group cultures, things like that. It usually tries to obscure those things and put those things away. It's like, no, that's not important. Don't look at that. Just treat everybody as an individual. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. However, the danger that we have here and what this symbolizes is Trump, of course, has invited in the first socialist and Muslim migrant mayor of the United States, of a major city of the United States, invited him into the White House. And it symbolically looks like the kind of the embracing the two most dangerous forces that the West is facing right now, which I believe are both communism and Islam. And we're not talking about communism today. We could kind of hint it throughout it, but we are going to talk about Islam. That's going to be our focus for today. And my thesis is essentially is that liberalism the pluralistic liberalism is the Trojan horse that says, hey, we're going to have this open, free society, freedom of religion. Everybody gets to believe whatever they want. Sounds great. But what we're seeing in the West is that Islam does not cohabitate with that sort of pluralistic view of religion and the world. And in fact, it is now using it as a Trojan horse and entering into the gates of the West and kind of taking over and steamrolling the prior free liberal societies. And I've got a lot to back this up today. So we're going to start by, I don't know if you have any comments, Ryan. I'm going to start with Europe. But before I get into that, I just want to see if you want to respond to anything I just said there.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's important to talk about the context of all these things. I think that's a very good point to talk about. Well, was this really a good idea for him to have? I mean, I said it's good for him to be meeting with leaders and all that. But I do think it's important. I say that because he has very clearly stated what he doesn't like about Mamdani. But I don't know if that happened during the meeting. But I do think it is a legitimate question to ask: is it somehow legitimizing these different things that don't assimilate, that do not go well with other values and that sorts of thing? And so I think it is important to talk about.
Okay. Well, let's jump into I'm going to talk about the issues we're facing in Europe first and foremost, because I truly believe that Europe is ahead of us in embracing a mass migrant Muslim population, and they're facing some serious issues. And this is basically the future of the West. This is the future of America unless we do something to stop it. So let's talk about what's been occurring in Islam. And before I get into the receipts here, the first thing I'm just going to point out is, of course, why does it seem like Islam it has such a difficult time assimilating to the West? Why does it seem like it's either you can have Western values or you can have Islam, but you can't have both together? They just don't mix. They don't mix well together. There's a lot of cultural concerns for the migrant populations that have come into Europe. You have, of course, the treatment of women that just being so different from the cultures, the country of origin they're coming from. You have stuff like child brides and cousin marriages. But honestly, the biggest deal is the idea of jihadism, which is this world dominating drive, whether you're an extremist Muslim or a non-extremist Muslim. If you take your Muslim faith seriously, you have an aspect of this that's like this world dominating drive. Not necessarily all Muslims are going to be violent, but all serious Muslims will have a dominating and conquering culture. And that does not assimilate well to the Western culture, which is the liberal culture, where it's like, well, no, we're all supposed to get along. No one's trying to force the religious views on anybody else. And it's like I said, that pluralistic liberalism is allowing for this Islamic takeover in the West. And if you think I'm just making this up, I'm going to run through some things real fast here of what's been happening in Europe. So this started in the 2010s. This really shocked a lot of people, got a lot of people's attention. But just some examples here of how the Muslim populations in Europe have not assimilated into Europe and are in fact changing Europe. So we had in the 2010s a lot of young men in Europe, and these were young Muslims that their families had been in Europe for multiple generations at this point. They left Europe to go join ISIS in the thousands. And this shocked people. This shocked a lot of British people. I was listening to a British podcast about this where they're saying they knew people like these young Muslims that were working in finance and working in like good jobs. And then all of a sudden they up and said, all right, I'm leaving Europe, even though my family's been here for generations, because I am going to go join a terrorist organization in Syria and fight because it just struck to like the core belief about the jihadism is what I was referring to. This is like this need to dominate and conquer, and through even violent means at times. And I'm putting this out as an example because this was thousands again of young Muslims that left Europe and then were bragging online about the amount of people that they had killed, or the basically the slave women that they took for themselves through this opportunity that they're fighting in Syria. And it really shocked people because it was like, before that, people were like, well, you have extremist Muslims, and those are like the crazy, crazy Muslims that are violent. And then you have all the normal Muslims, but ours are like two distinct groups. And this kind of shattered that of like, there's not really two completely distinct groups. In fact, you can look at so often, it seems like the non-extremist Muslims are basically like making opportunity for creating more extremist Muslims in the future, or just like not really trying to distance themselves that strongly from the more extremist Muslims. And again, it goes back to, it's like there isn't really a non-extremist version of Islam. If you take Islam seriously, you're either trying to conquer and dominate the countries you're moving into, or you're just not taking your religion seriously. And so that's my first one that I thought was just absolutely bonkers. Getting into some issues that they're having in Europe itself. I've had all kinds of crazy issues. Of course, we have the grooming gangs in the UK. This is an instance that started in the 90s. Groups of Pakistani men were grooming and raping women in the UK. And we can talk about this and why the government did this, but there was a mass cover up by the UK police and the government. It even went up all the way up to Parliament, where they tried to cover this up and tried to make it look like it wasn't happening. They didn't try to investigate and stop this from happening. At different times, victims were arrested instead of the gangs. So these young women who were getting violated were the ones getting in trouble with the law somehow in some twisted fashion, instead of actually the perpetrators getting arrested and held to justice. And it's only now, this has been going on since the 90s, and it's been so covered up by the liberal government in UK. It's only now, like literally the last couple of years, and this year, we have some movement going on where they're actually trying to do something about it. It's only because there's been enough public outrage. Elon Musk has brought attention to this. And it's crazy how long that this has taken, but it points to the fact that the progressive governments in the West are very willing to overlook any issues that Islam is bringing into their country and migrants are bringing into their country, because they have framed up this idea, that to do something about that would be like racist or xenophobic or Islamophobic or something like that. And that's like the worst thing that you can be, right? And so they'd rather have crime go, unchecked than to actually like address it. So that's been a major issue.
Well,
you want to comment on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I want to make a quick point. I just think, we use this word extreme, and I just want to say that when we say extreme, people say, oh, there's extreme Christians. But I'm going to say, if you say, what is a faithfully extreme Muslim? Well, it should be like the founder of Islam, which would be Muhammad. And so doing those kinds of activities that you would see and that are recorded in the Quran. And so that's what we're talking about here. I mean, that is what we're talking about. It is a faithful outworking. I say faithful as in to the true origin of Islam. And that is the extreme version of it. If you take an extreme Christian to the faithful interpretations and faithful use of the Bible and Jesus, an extreme Christian would look like Jesus Christ. That is what we are to do as Christians, to become like Christ. And so it is not, and they'll point to like what the Bible said about the Canaanites and all of this. But it's not the same to have a one point in time command and to have a perpetual command to go on at all times. And so it's a very different situation. In fact, there's different ways to interpret even with the Canaanites and what was going on there. So I don't mean to oversimplify that, but what I'm saying is there is no comparison when somebody say an extreme Christian or someone who professes to be a Christian and goes and does violence against someone, an innocent person, is not faithfully working out the Christian values and the biblical worldview. But a person who is in ISIS can go back to the Quran and all their writings and say they are faithfully working out. So that is a clear and important distinction that I think we need to make.
It is. I mean, even just taking the example, like you said, of Jesus and Muhammad, the example of Jesus being a nonviolent figure. And then Muhammad, who was, once he took enough power for himself, went back and killed all the people that had previously rejected him, took child wives, all that kind of stuff. Is just like the example that that's why that's why I'm like pointing out that, like, even going back to the founding of Islam, with it being a mix of like Judaism and Christianity and then like mystic stuff that was occurring. But with even the founder itself, it's like, it's so there's so many issues there that's like, yeah, if you're trying to be as faithful as you can be to traditional Islam, it's like you're
Well,
going to have a lot of problems,
and
unfortunately. And it doesn't jive. The values there do not jive with the free, open societies of the West.
Well, and I would just say there's different levels of how to influence with Islam, and there's different depending on if they're a majority, a super majority, not a majority, and how they can do things and what's involved with that, and it's all work detailed out in the Quran and how they did that. And so the way for Christians to influence is much different. And so yeah, I just think it's important distinction to make because people try and do this. It's called a false equivalence. That's what it's called.
It is. Yeah, we should do another episode, maybe comparing and contrasting Christianity to Islam. Continuing on with what's happening in Europe. So basically, the easiest way to sum it up is Europe has been a high trust society for many years, homogenous cultures, mostly very liberal, but open to freedom of religion. And a lot of very atheistic culture in a lot of ways, but still, the Christian influence. And what is happening right now is the migrant communities coming in, majority of which are Muslim, are creating a situation where the high trust society is breaking down. And you see the examples of this where you have progressive European women who have been liberal progressives their whole life and have been open for mass migration are now going on social media crying and being like, what do I do? Who do I vote for? How do we fix this? Because I cannot leave my house without being harassed by migrants, of all of which are of Muslim backgrounds. Because the culture there is just so incredibly different, and they're experiencing the culture shock of the of Pakistani world being imported to their front door. Basically, we've had massive riots led by Muslim migrant communities in Europe, pointing to a huge one that happened in Paris in 2023, where thousands of cars, hundreds of buildings were burned in Paris and other cities over an incident that occurred with the police. And essentially, what occurs now in the Middle East, occurs now in Europe, is anytime that something happens in the Middle East that flares up the religious tensions, then you see an explosion happening all across Europe. We have like miniature riots and stuff like that. And it's making the Europeans be like, wait, why did we just import in what is like this huge divisive issue between like Israel and Hamas and all that kind of stuff? It's like anytime something big like that happens, you see this explosion happening all across Europe, as if they were, but it's like, wait, this isn't like, that's not our country. That's not our issue. Why is this happening now in our backyard? Mobs of people quoting, globalize the intifada, however you pronounce that word. Unfortunately, they've seen crime rates across Europe have skyrocketed with recent mass migration from majority Muslim countries as well. The only country really that's not seen this is Poland, because they have not allowed the mass migration of Muslim countries. It's made Poland now as one of the safest countries in Europe, mainly because they have not allowed mass migration of any kind. But the countries that have, unfortunately, again, the progressive governments have tried to hide this from their populace. So you have Germany here. Germany publishes per capita crime rates for the first time with some astonishing results. The countries have tried to make it a hate crime to like point out or talk about the crime rates among the Muslim migrants. And they've tried to cover it up or not report the crimes, or they just stop reporting the statistics or stop recording them. But recently, the pressure's gotten too much where they've had to release some statistics and they've had to actually start reporting some crimes. So you see down here, Algerian teenagers are an astonishing 56 times more likely to be suspected of crime than their German-born counterparts, according to new German statistics published for the first time.
Wait, that doesn't say 56% more likely. It says 56 times more likely.
56 times more likely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And so this is something
Not
that
2 times, 50 times.
56
Wow.
times more likely. Yeah. So that's absolutely insane. I don't know if you saw this. I'll run through this really quickly, but there's a larger conspiracy at work here. You probably know something about the Muslim Brotherhood, which I think Trump literally just denounced as a terrorist organization. They're actually denounced as a terrorist organization in lots of countries now, thankfully. But the French did a report just this year that got a lot of attention, which was they basically showed that the Muslim Brotherhood, which again is a terrorist organization, labeled as one in many countries, has been working for decades in Europe to infiltrate government and cultural institutions, from schools to city boards and everything like that, across all of Europe. And they've been operating inside of like almost a dozen different countries, not just France, including the UK and Sweden and France and Germany and several other countries. and they've literally been working to try to bring Sharia law to Europe, and that's their goal, and that's what they've been attempting to do. This has started to get some attention, but it's kind of like the damage has kind of already been done in a lot of ways. They already have a lot of influence. And also, I saw this recently that there's a lot of support for this among young Muslims in France. You say 6 in 10 young Muslims in France prefer Sharia law. That prefer Sharia law means they prefer it over the law of the land. They think the Sharia law should be in place instead of the French laws. 4 in 10 back Islamist groups, including like the Muslim Brotherhood. And so this is a major survey that recently found that, it goes down here, the younger generation of Muslims is far more radical than their predecessors in terms of preferring Sharia law and supporting Islamist organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood. And so this has been, as a conspiracy that's kind of broken open recently. It's gone on for decades, and now people are realizing, wait a second, this makes sense now. This makes sense as why their governments and their city ordinances and things like that have been slowly moving and shifting towards preferring Islam as like the dominant culture now in Europe over other things. And the UK is really, really dealing with this right now. It's basically their parliament has floated like blasphemy laws. They're getting close to potentially having blasphemy laws, like countrywide blasphemy laws, where it's like if you say something about Muhammad or the Quran, you will go to jail in the UK, for which is not a Muslim country. You will go to jail for breaking a Muslim only law. And it's kind of already there, socially speaking. The entire country basically walks on eggshells around the migrant Muslim communities, doesn't want to offend them. And the English residents can't complain about it. They can't complain about harassment of women. They can't complain about the crimes, or else they get arrested for hate crimes. So that's a lot of information there. Well, what do you think about what's happening in Europe? And the question is, can it happen here in America? What's your thoughts?
Wow. I mean, I think, I do want to say, though, that I do know it's not like every Muslim person you meet is going to be this kind of extreme and wanting Sharia law and that sort of thing. I mean, I know personally Muslims I've met that at a university from Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and they would want nothing to do with some of this stuff. And so I don't mean to throw everybody together, but when you bring in big groups of people from the countries like Pakistan or the countries where that is the law, because like in Saudi Arabia, a lot of times I know what my friend told me was that the government uses Islam to control the people. And so it's not even necessarily something that they even necessarily believe in, but they're using it to control the people. And so, but the people are used to this. And so for me, I think we shouldn't really be surprised that it's happening, because it's, like I said, it's the natural outworking of importing or immigrating these massive groups of people that have vastly different values and that by definition cannot assimilate. And so the fact that we're talking about Sharia law, and people can look up what Sharia law is and what it means, but it is not something that you would want in your city. And so it's vastly different than the laws that we have here. So I think we should definitely expect that if we are not paying attention and we start continuing with this mass immigration or have more of that in the West, we would see the same pattern. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think we could do the same thing again and again and expect a different result. I think that's one of the definitions of insanity. And so doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And so, I think it's important to be paying attention to this. I think we keep a soft heart toward people and the Muslims that we know, and we still share the truth with them. And because Muslims are very open to conversations, the ones that I've known, they want to know what you think. What are your spiritual beliefs? They want to know why you think Jesus is who he says he was, and how, like, what's the difference? Like, they're very open. So, and very approachable. And so you should be open to having discussions with them. But these kinds of situations where people are in a neighborhood and they can't go outside, that's probably not the kind of Muslims that are willing to have those kinds of discussions. That's quite a different situation. I'm talking about, in the workplace or whatever it is, where you just happen to have a relationship with someone. So, yeah, I just think it's important, though, that people are paying attention to this and they're aware of this. But at the same time, you don't want to overdo it with people that and they're not necessarily for this type of thing. But at the same time, we can't put our heads in the sand. So
absolutely. Yeah. And that's why it feels like it can be a difficult topic to talk about at times, because I don't want to overgeneralize. And I'm glad that you pointed some of that out, because I don't want to overgeneralize. But it is getting to the point where it's like, I think the main issue is the mass migration. That's the main issue, where it's like you have a mass migration from a different culture coming in that seems to be, pretty game with, having their culture spread and dominate and take over eventually because they're having more kids than the resident Europe already, indigenous Europeans. And that's kind of the same thing. The same thing could happen here in the United States.
Well,
Oh, sorry, go for it.
Just real quick, I would say with the key that you just said, the key, mass migration.
Right.
If you bring in families here and there and they're dropped into communities, they're going to get to know the neighbors. They're going to be, and they may not assimilate. They may still go to the mosque. They may not be, but they're going to be in the walk of everyday life. But if you bring in a community, well, that's completely different. Like my wife and I were just down in a part of Florida where there's lots of Brazilians. My wife's from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and that whole community is from Brazil. And so it's like one of the families we were talking to, they're like, yeah, well, I can't talk English with anybody because everybody here is speaking Portuguese. So I got to go somewhere else to learn English. And they're in the middle of Florida. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just saying a community comes in, you know what kind of restaurants are down there? What kind of, that's what you're going to have. What kind of kiosks, what kind of food, what kind of, it's all very Brazilian. Now that's not a problem because Brazil is very much like America in terms of values and in terms of what, so, I mean, it's not a problem. It actually assimilates and integrates very well, but that's just an example of, hey, you have lots of people in the same area. That's what you're going to have. And so if that's what we're seeing in Pakistan, well, you bring thousands of people together from Pakistan and they're in the same area, you should expect that to be the same. And you know what? If only 10% of people in the U.S. are involved in politics and know what's really going on, and then you bring thousands of people, put them in one community, and all of them care about what's going on, and they want to go and take leadership, well, guess what? You're going to have lots of influence, and they're going to be the ones on the board. And guess what? We got caught sleeping because the church abandoned the culture decades ago, and so it's time to wake up, and we need to start taking the place that we need to take.
Yeah.
And so that's one other topic, but that's how you can have this. It makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and you made a good point there about it does seem like largely, and I'm going to get to some of this in a little bit, that the more of the Islam community that comes over in mass does not shy away from taking their religion to politics and saying, all right, well, we want to be we want everything to be like Muslim law, and that's what we're going to push for. And in the West, a lot of Christians are super liberalized, and the liberalization is saying, well, no, we don't want to push for our culture. We don't want to push for our religion. We just want everything to be equal and neutral, right? And that's kind of the myth of liberalism, is it says that we could have this basically like neutral space where which is very pluralistic, and it shatters and it's shown to be a delusion as soon as you have a very strong culture come in that says, yeah, no, that's ridiculous. We're doing our thing. It just steamrolls it. So that's what's happened in Europe. I have a quote here I have to read because, well, before I get into that, why is this allowed to happen just by one sentence reason is because there's a reason why progressive governments for decades now have preferred Islam over Christianity, and they do. And the reason is it's because it goes into the whole intersectionality and like cultural Marxism. But essentially what it is cultural Marxism looks for the places in society where it's like you could basically break society and upend it and put people on the bottom, the oppressed class, over the oppressor class. And so cultural Marxism says, well, Christianity has been the dominant religion in the West, and so therefore it's oppressive because it's the dominant religion. And so what the leftists have done, the progressives have done, is they looked at Islam and said, we will use Islam to replace Christianity. We're going to break the West with Islam because they don't like the West, because they know the West was built on Christianity first and foremost, and it was built on like the Enlightenment and reasoning and even individual freedoms. And they don't like that stuff. They want to replace it with communism. So they're literally using Islam as a tool in order to break the West. However, it was not a tool that they will be able to wield for much longer. Like, they are going to lose control of it because Islam and leftists, the gay race, communism, do not get along at the end of the day. They really don't. So I've seen this, and it's definitely true of the UK and why they flooded in so many Muslim migrants. And it's also the truth about the left here in the United States, that they prefer Islam over Christianity because they know that they can use it to basically break the mold of what the West has been, because they don't like the West and they want to do that. But this is what's going to happen. So if you are familiar with the Dune series, I love this quote by it's from a character from the Dune series written by Frank Herbert. But this is essentially what a strong culture does to a culture that is a liberal culture, which the West has been a liberal culture for a long time. And the quote is, "When I am weaker than you, I ask you for freedom because it's according to your principles. When I'm stronger than you, I take away your freedom because that is according to my principles. And that's essentially what has happened in Europe when the Muslims are coming in and being welcome. It's like, okay, yeah, great. Set up your Muslim enclaves. You have the freedom to do this because you have freedom of religion. And now they're saying, all right, okay, we want to have blasphemy laws in the UK. And that is like, well, you're taking away the Europeans' freedoms because that is according to your principles, even though they welcomed you in because that was according to their principles. So it's the whole idea of the liberalism does not stand well in the face of a actual strong culture, and so that's what we're facing here. I am going to get into the United States here in a second. We're going to talk about what is happening right now in the United States. Is this an issue going on here? But first of all, we're going to hear a word from our sponsor.
Investing can be confusing and scary, but it doesn't have to be. Genesis Gold Group takes the guessing out of the game and guides you on your gold investment journey. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections, kind of like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer high security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there, 100% owned by you. So don't wait to get started. Visit filibustedgold.com today for a free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.
I will let you respond, Ryan, before I jump into America and some of the concerns that we're seeing here in the States.
Yeah, so just a couple of points. I would say, just to be clear, from a political standpoint, from a Christian standpoint, Christians should be involved and engaged in politics. That is a bad interpretation of Scripture. We should be influencing and involved in the politics, in the marketplace, and all that. It's this separation of politics and cultural engagement and all that stuff, like real cultural engagement from the pulpit and from Christianity, is not a faithful outworking of the Bible. That is a big error and mistake that has happened. Another thing I would say is, I love that quote that you gave that really encapsulates it well. But I would say that the liberal version of freedom, or the liberal version of these things, are not the actual definition of these things. Because if you think about what is freedom, every freedom I have has a corresponding responsibility that everyone else has that helps execute that freedom. So if I have a right to life, per se, you have a responsibility to not kill me unjustly, right? And so it's the same thing where you start to see a conflict where you say, oh, a woman has a right to kill a baby in her womb. Well, that baby, you have a responsibility to protect, and that baby, and there's not an opposing. So that means there's a conflict there. That means one of those things is not actually a right. It's not actually a freedom. And so it's not a faithful outworking of things. And so that's something that we need to be aware of, is that because people will use emotional language and they'll say, well, yeah, it's freedom of religion. Yeah, it's this. Yeah, it's that. And they'll use all these same words, but they mean something very different. And it's not. And if we're just kind of going along with it and not really thinking critically and deeply about things, well, then we can fall for that sort of stuff, like these false dichotomies that I mentioned. And so it's just something we need to be aware of as people give these arguments for these different things. It's like they fall flat on their face. They're incoherent. They don't even work on their own terms in many cases.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think that neutral political spaces, and not trying to influence the culture abroad with like your values and your religion, that is a liberal idea. It's not a Christian idea. That's a liberal value. This is something that liberals want to see, because they want a pluralistic society where everyone has their own atomized beliefs.
But I will say,
no strong religious core holding everyone together. But the Christian values of actually like discipling the nations involves you get to apply the gospel and the Bible to more places than just your own individual life, which we've seen with the entire creation of all Western countries, have applied Christianity in some way or another, or culturally, and that's kind of why the West is still here and why it's been as stable as it has been.
What I was going to say is, I think that, but what I say sometimes incoherent, the liberal view, the leftist view that says we need to accept everybody, we need to accept everything, we need to be pluralistic, all this, it's incoherent, because anybody who disagrees with that is a view that they're not accepting. Yes. That is a view. And I say, no, I think it's only this way. And they say, well, no, we can't accept that. It's not very inclusive. And I say, well, why aren't you being inclusive of my views then? And so, in other words, it's incoherent. And so people say, well, you can't force your morality. You can't legislate morality. That's crazy. That makes no sense. Every law is legislated morality. It's whose morals are you going to be legislating? and don't steal, don't kill, don't bribe. Like, you don't think those are moral laws like that? Come on. So this is something that, what are we really talking about here? Let's understand it.
Yeah. No, you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. Let's run through some of the issues that we're seeing here in the United States. And to be fair, we are not seeing the kinds of things that we're seeing in Europe, as far as I'm aware. But I am basically putting this out as like, hey, this is the canary in the mines. Like, we have to figure out what we're going to do with the problem before we get to where Europe is, because it's not somewhere that we want to be here in the States. And so we have had some issues recently. Michigan is a prime example of this. They have cities that are now majority Muslim, and usually nearly half the population is migrant based and have Muslim leadership. This is a city that's gotten some attention recently for two different incidents, Dearborn and Michigan. The first one here is they recently, the county, actually, it wasn't the city leadership, it was the county leadership, which obviously is also Muslim. They renamed two intersections after a man named Osama Siblani, I think, and he is a publisher of a local newspaper there, Arab American News, that's actually based there in Dearborn. And then this Christian resident came and he had an issue with this renaming of the streets in his town because this individual, Siblani, has, with his newspaper, advocated for Hamas and Hezbollah, two terrorist organizations, and with his newspaper has called for more violence and people doing whatever they can do to support Hamas and Hezbollah in their support for like the Palestinian cause. And so the Christian resident, he took issue with this. He said the renaming to this guy was provocative. He said it's like we kind of might as well name the streets Hezbollah or Hamas Street, because this guy is promoting Hezbollah and Hamas, and he doesn't think that's things that should be promoted. He quoted Jesus, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And the Muslim mayor responded by yelling at him. I don't have a picture of the Muslim mayor here. He responded by yelling at him, saying, "You are a bigot, you are a racist, you're an Islamophobe. Although you live here, I want you to know as mayor, you are not welcome here. And the day you move out of the city will be the day that I launch a parade celebrating the fact that you've moved out of the city." That's what he yells at this Christian resident. So you see some clashing of cultures and clashing of values already occurring here. This same city mayor, this is the second article here, recently has received lots of complaints because mosques in the city have begun about 2 years ago. It seems this started happening, and it's been ramping up the amount of times and how loud they've gotten. They've started doing calls to prayer 5 times a day over loudspeakers in the city, starting at 5:30 in the morning. So
this is something that was not allowed, and they passed something to allow it. Am I correct? They did an ordinance. What's that?
You know about this?
Well, go ahead. If you're going to go into it, I thought
you go into it. Yeah, if you know about it, go into it.
Well, I was just going to say, I think I talked about this on a previous episode, that this is like an exception that was made. Like this was not allowed to just randomly do these loud speakers. Like you have to have permits, you have to go through all this process and this and that. And they actually went through with the city, went through and passed, I think, an ordinance. You said it was Dearborn. I know it's happened in several cities, but I thought maybe it was in Minnesota. So I might be confusing the two, but I mean,
I think it's happening in multiple cities. This is just another example that I've seen. I haven't seen it going around. So,
but I will say, I mean, that's something that, I mean, I don't imagine I think it'd be great to have Christian prayer in name of Jesus Christ going all over the place, but I'm not sure I would say like that should be happening at 5 a.m. to disrupt the neighborhood, or you should be going through the street. Like, I mean, I don't know, if you got a parade and it's in the middle of the day and you're going through the neighborhood, like, okay, but I mean, this is something that seems like not an exception they would make for a Christian church to want to do.
Yeah, daily loudspeakers blaring, 5:30 in the morning, call to prayer. They've got a lot of complaints. Muslim mayor has dismissed them all. We had this issue here in Texas recently, which did get maybe shut down by the Texas governor, possibly, but I've been seeing some other concerning things here. But essentially, there was a Sharia law city under development called Epic City, I think, and we did an episode on that recently. That was recently shut down by the Texas governor. And they were investigating and looking into it. But I have seen some reports that essentially the group that was trying to build that Muslim enclave, which was going to have basically like Sharia law in the Muslim enclave, that they have changed the name of the development and they are just trying to pitch it again, right? They're trying to do it again. I don't know if it's going to be much different from their first attempted project or not. But this points to a larger issue of this what seems to be, and I've heard some other reports of this as well, of the opportunity that's open for Muslim enclaves to start being just created in the United States. And that's what we talked about before, is just like that idea of like you have groups coming in that are not assimilating, that are now just recreating the culture from the country that they came from. Obviously, there's going to be massive cultural clashes and issues there, because it's not becoming, people aren't becoming Americanized. They're like, no, we're just doubling down on, yes, we took a Pakistani city and now we placed it here in the we rebuilt it and now it's here in the United States. So we've gone a little long, so I'm going to try to sum this up here and maybe, get your last thoughts, but any solutions to this, because this is where it's, this is where we talked about the whole idea of like, what about freedom of religion? What about all these different things? I will say, and I did say like, this is like a weakness of Trump. Trump has done some stuff that I support and I'm good with. However, when I say a weakness of Trump, I think he's more like liberal minded in the sense of like I said, like a 90s liberal of like, let's all just get along. And there's an aspect of that I think is good, and especially is helpful for a politician, because you kind of have to be that way. But at the same time, as an American who's concerned about this, I'm kind of like, I would like to see more conservatives and conservative leadership take this very seriously and say, yeah, we're going to really do some things to make sure what happened in Europe is not allowed to happen here in the United States. One thing that Trump has done recently was he reinstated a travel ban. I guess that was in place in his first term. And most of the countries on the travel ban are actually Muslim countries. So that's one thing, but I still think the door is kind of open for legal Islamic migration expansion to still eventually overrun the United States if more isn't done, basically, to keep that from happening. So personally, I think we need to rethink what viable freedom of religion looks like in the West. I would love to see an amendment to the Constitution that actually declares the United States a Christian country. I do not believe the United States will be able to last for much longer in the future if we do not take that very seriously and say, yeah, we're actually a Christian country, because I think pluralistic liberalism has shown itself not to work. It opens the door to the death cult. It opens the door to crazy leftist communism stuff where they want to kill people that don't agree with them, that aren't tolerant enough. And liberalism opens the door for that. Liberalism also opens the door for very intense, strong, extremist sort of Islamic cultures to come in and dominate. And you've seen that in Europe. And so I would like to see, I don't want anyone to go to jail for their religious beliefs, their personal religious beliefs, but I would like to see more action taken to make sure that Islam does not just run ripshod over the West and over the United States specifically. What are your thoughts on that?
I do think we do need to take this seriously. I would say step one is hold city leaders and police chiefs and judges and city attorneys and public defenders, everybody accountable when we find examples of things being swept under the rug or covered up or whatever. There needs to be harsh penalties for these types of things where they are actually perpetuating or allowing these ridiculous things to happen that are against our laws and values and those sorts of things. I mean, obviously against laws, but that is one thing to be holding accountable. The other is why are we talking about immigration or migration? Like, why would somebody immigrate to another country? Okay, so they need to be adding value to that country. Okay, and if we are thinking we're going to help world poverty through immigration, go watch a video called "Immigration and World Poverty Explained with Gumballs," and it talks about how if you immigrated everybody to the U.S. or to the West or whatever, like if you took like 4% of the world's poverty and immigrated and over and flooded every wealthy nation, it would do nothing to change those countries. It would actually not even make a dent. It's like, and he shows how it does. So that is not how, if your passion is to solve that, it is actually not going to happen through immigration. And so what is the point? What is the reason you want to do the immigration? You have to actually go there and help create local economies there and keep the brightest minds in those places, because they're the ones that are going to help create those economies. If you migrate all of them, you're just making it even more difficult for those countries to get rid of the poverty and those sorts of things. And there's lots of ministries, lots of ways, companies, things people can get involved in to actually make a difference if that is their heart. So what other reason? I mean, you have asylum, which that's fine. I mean, that's acceptable if that's really the reason, but you do that through a port of entry. You don't do that swimming across the river. And so that's something that I think, to me, that's where we need to go with this. Is like, what's the real reason that we want to do the immigration? Well, then if we go with that, then yeah, we probably don't need to be doing mass immigration, because we're not solving any problems. We're just creating more problems. And so I think that, to me, needs to be looked at. And then, like I said, holding people accountable in these areas where things are being allowed to happen that are violations of our laws and those sorts of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. My final thought about that is just that I think you're right. I do think that we have been way too open to mass migration in the West in general. And I still think we have too much migration and too many work visas for the United States. We don't need it. The United States is full. We've got plenty of people here. It's not helping anybody else. It's not helping anyone here. It's driving down wages. It is causing all sorts of problems. We had an issue recently with, I saw this was like all these people from Somalia were running for mayor. And again, one of these like Muslim majority towns in like Michigan or Minnesota or whatever. And that was, and there was the front runners were appealing to the Somali community and saying how they were Somali first, and their home and their heart is Somali, right? Not in Somalia, not the United States. And that's the kind of immigration that we have seen so much of, that it's getting to the point where it's like, yeah, even if it upsets people and people want to call us dirty names or whatever, like I am on enough of the nationalist bent to say, no, we actually need to be the United States. And the United States has a history and it has a culture. Predominantly, our culture has been Christian, and it should remain Christian. And it has been very Western and very European. And I think the culture should remain that way. And I'm not a racial supremacist of any kind. It's not really an issue of race for me. It goes down to an issue of culture. And when you have cultures that are coming in saying, yeah, I primarily about this culture and this country and not America. I'm just using this as a way for an opportunity for myself. I'm not here to build up America. I'm mainly concerned about my own home country. We don't need that in the United States. It's not going to be helpful for anyone here, and it's not even going to be helpful for the countries from where the people are coming from. So I would love to see an end to that, and I'm hoping that we continue in that direction. So this has been a big, heavy topic for today. I'm sure we will tackle more of these issues with Christianity and Islam and different things in nationalism in the future. And until then, Ryan, thank you for joining me. And everybody, thanks for tuning in. God bless. Have a great day.
God bless.
Gold is not just a backup plan if the world falls apart. It's an investment opportunity that could set you up for generations. There's never really a bad time to invest in gold, but you want to make sure you have the right guide. And that is where Genesis Gold Group shines. Whether you are a first-time buyer or a seasoned investor, their trusted expertise and competitive pricing makes them an easy choice. They offer tangible assets in case of emergencies, but they can also design the perfect IRA just for you. And they'll even cut through all that confusing red tape from the IRS. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer a more high-security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there and 100% owned by you. Genesis Gold Group is a safe, simple, and convenient way to invest. Visit filibustedgold.com today for your free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.